Hello and welcome to India's World, where we focus on India's foreign policy, its achievements and challenges. I'm Tracy Shilshi, and today we'll be focusing on Nepal, where the alliance of the Communist Party of Nepal Unified Marxist-Leninists, or the CPN-UML, and the Communist Party of Nepal Maoist Centre are headed for a solid majority in the parliamentary and provincial polls, and the Nepali Congress looking a distant second. The vote, which took place in two phases in November and December, is the first parliamentary election since 1999 and comes after 2 years after the approval of the new constitution. 10 governments in as many years. Is it finally a new era of political stability in Nepal? And how will its relations with India be now? To answer these questions, we have in studio an esteemed panel. We've got Mr. Rakesh Sood, former ambassador to Nepal. We have Mr. S.D. Muni, distinguished fellow at the IDSA, and Nishchal Pandey, director at the Center for South Asian Studies. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me here on the show. Mr. Sood, if I could start with you, despite their differences, KP Oli and Prachanda joining forces, it's a smart move now. By the way, it seems to have paid off.
It certainly has. I think the extent of this victory, as we don't have the final figures yet, but out of the 165 seats for which the elections have been held, it would appear that the left front of KP Oli and Prachanda, the two parties, CPN-UML and the Maoist Centre, they will probably account for 110 seats or more. And that is a very, very comfortable number. Very comfortable number. I think the most astonishing thing has been the complete decimation of the Nepali Congress. From being the largest party in the previous assembly. The previous assembly was very large. It was 601 members. And Nepali Congress was the largest with more than 200 seats. From there to have been reduced to perhaps in the range of 23, 24, 25, maybe in that kind of range out of 165 is really a rude shock.
Absolutely. And how do we see, Professor Muni, the challenges ahead for the left? Do we see KP Oli heading the government while Prachanda looks after the newly formed merger?
I think so, because Prachanda has already announced that KP Oli is the Prime Minister.
Yes.
Maybe he is looking forward to the presidency. Maybe. There are, I think, very sharp differences on the nature of presidency between both UML and the Maoists.
Okay.
Maoists would want an executive presidency or nearing executive presidency, and the UML is for a constitutional presidency, and they have made it very clear their differences are. I find that there are also minor differences at the grassroots level, but the kind of results which have come, hope that the alliance stays.
Yes.
But you should always carefully monitor it. And much would depend upon the specific programs. I think there are a couple of what you call irritating knots in it, like on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They have different views. Maoists have a different view. And how to accommodate the so-called marginalized, which election shows are no longer marginalized. That is, Madhesh, which has won only in, there is no wide support for them, except for in the province too. And Maoists have an approach to accommodate them more closely, whereas UML says that we have done the accommodation to the extent they deserve it.
Okay.
So there are issues of development, there are issues of constitutional changes. Kohli very clearly said no more constitutional changes, whereas Prachanda and the Maoists have been saying that we must have and try and accommodate them. So let us see how this alliance unfolds in governance. There is no doubt that they are in a majority and they would take the state. But the exaggerated fears which I think Nepali Congress projected, that the Communist Alliance would make a dictatorial system and all that, I think were too far exaggerated and very, very unrealistic. Because all said and done, Nepal communists all go to Pashupatinath and all have their sins, want their sins to be washed in Ganges. So it's a different communism, and we have seen them operating with democratic parties very smoothly, very peacefully.
Absolutely. All right, talking about the Nepali Congress, as Ambassador Sood has pointed out, it was quite a rude shock in a sense, the kind of numbers that we are seeing that they are getting at this point of time. And this has been a party that has been at the helm of, a lot of popular movements, changes that we've seen since the 50s. How do you see it moving forward, and trying to get away from this big shock and moving ahead? What do you see the future as for the party?
Well, it is a complete takeover by the left. I would even go to the extent of saying that it's a takeover by the CPN-UML, because the Maoist party will not have now the clout or the strength to split the coalition, because the UML will not require it. UML could even join forces with, join hands with Upendra Yadav's party and form a majority government. So therefore, Prachanda and the Maoist party will be a junior partner in the coalition. So it is a takeover by CPN-UML. Personally, it's a victory for Mr. KP Sarma Oli. That can be attributed to people's desire for political stability in a country which has, as you said rightly, we have seen 9 prime ministers in 10 years. We have seen 5 constitutions in the last 6 decades. So I think people were really clamoring for political stability in Nepal. Also a little bit of the backlash of the blockade, in which Mr. KP Oli was the prime minister, and he successfully, I think, cashed in on that feeling of grievance that the people had, and also the, as you said, the complete annihilation of the Nepali Congress. The Nepali Congress, I think, was suffering from poor communication with the voters. Number 2, aged and very tired leaders inside the party. Most of them even lost in their own constituencies. Nepali Congress also went away from BP's ideology of Mel Milap and went into the ideology of the communist parties. So the voter really did not have any choice. Because if you are also for republic, if you are also for secularism, if you are also for federalism, why should you vote for Nepali Congress? You might as well vote for the leftist parties. So I think Nepali Congress will have to go for real introspection reassessment within the party.
Of its strategy. All right. Professor Muni, is this then a final, consolidation of sorts that we are seeing of that process of Maoist integration into mainstream politics, that 2006 agreement that they signed, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement? Do you see that this is now in its final stage, it's finally in mainstream politics?
Well, I would hesitate to fully endorse what you're saying, because even at that time in 2006, the Maoists and the UML had very different views of what kind of a change should be ushered in. May I say that this election shows 2-3 very broad messages it gives. One, it is more than the communist, it is a victory of new Nepal nationalism.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to say, which has a very, very noticeable undercurrent of anti-Indianism. And that to some extent has arisen, as Nishchal said, partly because of the economic coercive diplomacy, which Nepalese call it blockade, Indians don't call it blockade, whatever else it is. That is one message, that it is more than the communist in the classical sense.
Yes.
It is a Nepali nationalism which has asserted itself. And many people who felt very uncomfortable have gone and voted with UML and the Maoists. This is number 1. Number 2, it is a very big slap to many of the candidates who were considered either coming from the families or those who were what you call dons, or some of those who are business dealers. And there was a sizable number of those people,
those kind of candidates,
which have also won. Thirdly, it is a very strong defeat of the those who have pleaded for religion and revival of monarchy, because the Kamal Thapa group,
yes,
which stood for it, and the RPP, which stood for it, has been wiped out much more than the Nepali Congress. Therefore, I think these 2-3 messages are very strong, very clear.
And that to an extent also hampered the Nepali Congress's strategy, do you feel?
Well,
because
Nepali Congress, I would add to some of the points which it showed a very poor leadership, number 1.
Okay.
Their campaign entirely focused on communist communist regime is coming, dictatorial regime is coming. Not on what they have done. They had given a constitution under their leadership. They did not emphasize it.
Yes.
They stood for certain developmental programs. They did not talk about it. They held the elections, despite, I think, the UML leader, Mr. Oli, was repeatedly alleging them that they will postpone the elections. They have held both the local, and it is remarkable success that in 18 months, 9 months of Prachanda's rule and 9 months of Devba's rule, they have held 3 elections, which everybody in Nepal earlier used to say it is impossible to happen, constitution will be sabotaged, so on and so forth. So I think instead of emphasizing them, they just carried on with one slogan, and this is where the Nepali Congress is lost. And thirdly, of course, Nepali Congress is viewed as being soft to the Tarai, which, as I said, the new nationalism does not accept, and it is also being viewed as soft to India, which again new nationalism does not accept.
So keeping all those implications in mind, how does it look like as far as India and Nepal relations are concerned? Prachanda, for one, is being seen as one of the left leaders, one of the few left leaders who was in fact a bit warm towards India, but we know how KP Oli's stand has been.
I'm sorry to correct you. KP Oli was also one of the left leaders who, when he was foreign minister and was home minister during the 90s, was seen as somebody who was very close to India. And in fact, we had close relationships with him when he was in government.
But during 2015, the blockade, during that time, of course, the rhetoric
he felt betrayed by India because he felt that India had tried to block his elevation to prime ministership.
All right.
And therefore, when there was the economic blockade on grounds that there was a law and order problem and things like that, he saw it as something which was being done to sabotage his tenure as prime minister.
Okay.
And I'm afraid I would say that unless there is a rethink on the part of, I think there are finite limits to how far, what is the proximity that Nepal will have with China. But certainly there has to be a rethink in Delhi. And I think, as Professor Muni said, there is a new Nepali nationalism which has carried the day. And both, while the Nepali Congress has suffered in terms of many of its leaders, and especially those who were seen as being close to Delhi, have lost completely. And you will find that in this election, you know, one of the new things in this election was that the provincial elections have also taken place. And we will find most likely that in 6 out of the 7 provinces, it will be the left front which will form the government. And in fact, in the 7th province, province number 2, where the Madhes-based parties have done a good showing, most likely we will see a coalition between Madhes-based parties and probably the Left Alliance, because the Madhes-based parties might see it in their interest to have a coalition with the left front so that the province can benefit and they are part of the larger pie, as it were, rather than with the Congress. In which case you would see a left front dominating both the central government as well as the federal governments. Finally, I think, you know, the whole business of neighborhood first, you know, when Prime Minister Modi got elected in 2014, his major foreign policy plank was neighborhood first. And when he went to Nepal in August of 2014, I think it was an enormously successful visit. There was not a single political party in Nepal which did not applaud the speeches he made, the statements he made, and the whole atmospherics around the visit. From there on, we have seen a steady decline. And I think time has come to do a basic course correction in order to restore a degree, a semblance of balance to India-Nepal relations, which have suffered hugely.
All right, Mr. Pandey, do you see that? Do you see that new Nepal nationalism, a new wave of sorts that you're seeing? Is that reflective? Do you also assess it in that manner?
Well, certainly yes. And not only that, there is also gross politicization in Nepal in all sectors of the nation. If you look at the judiciary, if you look at the academic institutions, our embassies abroad, the universities, even the police has been such grossly politicized that there is a saying in Nepal that if you are not a member of a political party, you are not even a citizen of Nepal today. You have to align yourself with one or the other major political party to get any assignment. And this is going to be now solidified because the CPN-UML party, let's not forget, owns hospitals, it owns medical colleges, it owns substantial amount of shares in banks and finance companies. So this is going to be solidified in the months and years ahead. turbulence and some headwind expected in Indo-Nepal relations. It is naturally going to be a problem for, and Ambassador Sood rightly used the term course correction. I think that has to be thought over by decision makers in Delhi.
All right. India is of course watching closely. China too watching closely, Ambassador Sood. And and now with the left emergence, and that too a strong one. Does China get a bit comfortable? Does it feel like it is perhaps going to be on the right side of the new government?
Absolutely, because I think there are reports about Chinese involvement in this election. There were earlier reports when the Left Alliance came together, when Maoist party led by Prachand and UML led by KPS Oli, when they announced their alliance, there were stories about the fact that this deal had been brokered by China. And so therefore, certainly, and as was pointed out, the Maoists are, truly speaking, very junior partners in the Left Alliance today based on the results, which means that the possibility, the room for maneuver that Prachand would have, because he has shown an incredible ability to be politically, shall I say, very agile, to switch from one alliance or to the other and so on. And but this time, because of the fact that he is such a junior member of the Left Alliance, that his agility, his political agility is hampered. So he will be forced to remain a junior partner with UML under KP Oli's leadership.
Initially, yes.
I wanted to say a couple of things on the India policy.
Yes.
There are two streaks in India policy. One is of, as he mentioned, Ambassador Sood mentioned, Prime Minister Modi's resilience, the way he first addressed the Nepalese. The other is the quote-unquote Dole doctrine of a muscular diplomacy. I think the resilience has to take a very strong priority.
Are you making a distinction between the two, Professor?
Well, analytically, yes. I mean, let us not get into too many details of it, but yes, analytically. And therefore, that resilience will have to take precedence over it. And I do see some indications of that, in the sense that when Prachand's son died, Prime Minister called him and even invited him to come to India. And after the blockade, he again, Mr. Oli was invited, and every effort was made to do what you call a course correction, that in order to make him feel more comfortable that, look, India is not hostile to you, so on and so forth. I think that is one thing. Secondly, I must say also on the Kathmandu side, that Kathmandu has to be acutely aware of some structural constraints and red lines which they need not cross vis-a-vis India. And the one biggest red line is that they are free to cooperate with China, and they would. But if any area which are security sensitive to India, and if there the Kathmandu steps forward ahead, it would be, as Nishchal says, lot of turbulence in our relations, and also within Nepal, because Nepal needs stability. There is no doubt about that. That is what it has to be done. Thirdly, earlier there was a tendency on the Nepali leaders' part to play the so-called China card. Whenever they were uncomfortable with India, they would lean towards China and show that we have an option, an alternative. Now that's no longer true, in the sense that now China assertively wants to come into Nepal and South Asia as a whole, whether Nepal likes it or not. And I think Nepalese, in their love for, or newly discovered love for China, will have to find out and probably learn from the experiences of other South Asian countries like Myanmar, Maldives, Sri Lanka, to some extent even Bangladesh, even Pakistan.
Yes.
That what are the costs involved in too much of a close dragon hug, put it this way. And if again the Nepalese are not sensitive to this very delicate balance, I think they will jeopardize their own development as also relations with India.
And
I would endorse that I think that as long as Nepal wanted to do a little bit of flirtation with China, it was fine.
All right.
But now, when they get closer into the dragon's embrace, they might find that it is a little more than they had bargained for. I would totally endorse that.
It may get more stifling, perhaps.
Exactly.
Yes. All right, and keeping all these, these concerns in mind, Mr. Pandey, does it augur well for Nepal then to also rethink its strategy, or for that matter, the upcoming new government to rethink its strategy, just as how India should be doing a course correction, perhaps for the left as well to do a course correction of their own in Nepal?
Yes, of course, because I think we are in a learning curve. We have not learnt from the other experiences. We are experiencing it ourselves for the first time. There is now a national consensus in Nepal that the train coming from Lhasa to Sigatse, already operational, Sigatse to Rasuagadi in a few years, I think it will be operational by 2020, is actually good for Nepal. It will bring Chinese investment, it will bring Chinese tourists. So there is a thorough national consensus. Why the Chinese private sector and private companies are winning tenders, whether it is bridge construction or road construction or telecom or what have you, it's because the government of Nepal, if it starts doing the infrastructure projects, it does not get implemented. It takes decades. So therefore, there is a real, the people of Nepal have felt that the Chinese companies are actually good because they swiftly implement these projects. So we are in a learning curve. On the issue of the left parties, I think they have to realize that the left parties in India, who are their counterparts, are no longer ruling. I think only they are ruling only one state in India, and none of the neighboring states of Nepal, whether it is Uttarakhand or Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or West Bengal, none of them are ruled by the left parties. Instead, we are having a complex, some sort of an inferiority complex, that despite of having cultural, religious relationship with Yogi Adityanath, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, who comes from the Nath family and who has relationship with the Gorakhnath temple in Gorkha, and Gorakhnath temple, of course, of which he is the Pithadis in Gorakhpur, and he has had age-old relationship with Nepal. We have this complex that we should not build relationship with Uttar Pradesh of today. So therefore, the left parties will have to really rethink on how to deal with India in the coming years.
But then comparing itself to the left of India and the left of Nepal, they are two completely, in a sense, they're pretty different.
No,
if you
but
think about
this
it.
Gorakhnath point is a bit exaggerated to my mind, because it is one small component in the entire structure of Indian policy. Like those who want, there are people in India who would want to see tomorrow Nepal converted into a Hindu state and a monarchical constitutional regime.
But those people have been marginalized.
That the Nepalese have given a very firm indication that this is not the direction we are moving in.
Absolutely.
And it must, those elements in India must draw lessons from them. That's what I said in the beginning.
In fact, I'm running short of time, but I need to talk about what Nepal wants, the citizens. What do they want? This vote, we are of course pointing out that it is a new wave of nationalism that we are seeing. We do know where the left stands as far as its policies and strategies are concerned. But at the moment, with such a big mandate, you've got to listen to the people of the country as well. And what is it that they want then?
Well, foremost, I think the people want swift reconstruction of the earthquake-ravaged homes, schools, the infrastructure, the UNESCO heritage sites, which is vital for our tourism. Instead of doing that, we are hiring and firing CEOs of the Nepal Reconstruction Authority. I think people are really fed up with this slow pace of reconstruction. That is the priority number one for the common man. I think secondly, we want political stability, because 9 prime ministers in 10 years has really crippled the economy. We are one of the poorest countries in the world. Our tourism growth, we are hovering around 700,000. We could achieve much more tourist arrivals because of our natural beauty and so forth. I think connectivity, people want better roads and better infrastructure. Our airport today, I can safely say it is the worst international terminal in South Asia, because we have just neglected all these things, and we are just in the process of the never-ending peace process, never-ending political transition. So people want those things to happen.
All right. We started, of course, the show by talking about how it was a smart move of KP Oli and Prachanda to align forces. Now, definitely it seems like it would be a smarter move to perhaps keep India and China both at a similar distance, but keep the friendship at a similar distance as well then.
Well, there has to be recalibration, as it were, and the recalibration has to be driven by the fact that today's China is a very different China from the China of 10 years ago. And so there is a China which is trying to make its presence felt in the region and beyond. However, one thing that has happened is that there are only 5 national parties. If you look at, say, the previous election for the Constituent Assembly in 2013, you will find that there were as many as maybe 30 parties represented in the Constituent Assembly. There was a complete fragmentation that had taken place. Today, there are only 5 national parties, 2 parties representing the Madhes vote primarily, the Nepali Congress, and the 2 parties of the left who have come together to form a left alliance. 5 national parties. So, in that sense, there is a consolidation. The second thing that has happened is that with these, that the left now is in a position where it will actually form the government either on its own or together with the Madhes, in the case of Madhesi parties, in the case of one province.
Okay.
So, in a sense, they will dominate. And if they actually follow the path or that Nishchal is saying about politicization of positions and posts and, you know, chairmanships of companies and so on, then I think it would be an extremely poor example. The third domestic challenge will be to how are they going to actually, I mean, notwithstanding the rhetoric that Oli has had about the constitutional amendment regarding the rights of the Madhesis and so on, but if the Madhesis actually get into a coalition with them in province 2, how is he going to, is he prepared to be generous?
Right.
Is he prepared to go a little bit beyond? Because the Maoists were favorably inclined to doing, and they actually tried to bring about the amendment.
Several issues, definitely. That's main challenges, of course, that are lying ahead for the new Nepal government. We'll, of course, have to wait and see what eventually the final results are and what eventually happens. Nepal's national interests, as our guests, of course, being saying here. Thank you so much, gentlemen, of course, for joining me here on the show. You know, national interests lying in the maintaining of a well-calibrated distance between both India and China. We'll, of course, keep eye out on all those developments. Do tell us what you feel. Send in your reactions on indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. We look forward to your comments. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us here on India's World.